On 14 August 2013, Egyptian security forces raided two camps of protesters in Cairo, one at Al-Nahda Square and a larger one at Rabaa al-Adawiyya Square. The two sites had been occupied by supporters of ousted President Mohamed Morsi, who was removed from office by the military after mass street protests against him. The camps were raided after initiatives to end the 6-week sit-ins failed, and as a result of the raids the camps were cleared out within hours. The raids were described by human rights watchers, one of the world's largest killings of demonstrators in a single day in recent history. According to Human Rights Watch, a minimum of 817 people, and more likely at least 1,000, were killed in Rabaa Square on August 14. According to the Egyptian Health Ministry, 638 people were killed on 14 August, of which 595 were civilians and 43 police officers, with at least 3,994 injured. The Muslim Brotherhood and National Coalition for Supporting Legitimacy claimed the number of deaths from the Rabaa al-Adawiyya mosque sit-in alone was about 2,600. Violent retaliation followed in several cities across the country. The interim government declared a month-long state of emergency in response, and curfews were instituted in many areas. The total casualty count made 14 August the deadliest day since the 2011 Egyptian revolution, which toppled Morsi's predecessor Hosni Mubarak. The clashes were widely denounced by several world leaders. Background: following the 2011 Egyptian revolution and subsequent instability, hundreds of thousands of Egyptians took to the streets calling for the resignation of Egypt's president, which culminated in the ouster of President Mohamed Morsi. For weeks, supporters of the deposed president occupied two squares, Rabaa al-Adawiyya in Nasser City, Cairo, and Al-Nahda in Giza, to protest his ouster, vowing to remain until Morsi was reinstated. Authorities delayed clearing the two protest camps as internal and external reconciliation process was established to resolve the crisis peacefully. According to the military, the sit-ins were flashpoints for outbreaks of violence and bloody confrontations amongst pro-Morsi, anti-Morsi demonstrators and security forces. The encampments became a potent symbol of Egypt's impasse as they grew more permanent, with stores, barbers and their own television station. Authorities saw the camps as destabilizing and disruptive and representing a threat to the Egyptian national security and an unacceptable terrorizing of citizens, accusing the pro-Morsi side of provoking bloodshed to win sympathy, and considered the standoff as hindering their view of putting Egypt on the roadmap to restoring civilian democracy. With a new constitution and new elections, the government threatened a raid on the protest camps on multiple occasions. Allegedly, an ultimatum was issued prior to 14 August, although Al-Azhar, Egypt's official Islamic authority, denied that such a warning had been given. Warning initiatives that tried to resolve the tension, including foreign-backed efforts by Gulf Arab countries, the EU, and the USA, failed to yield any positive outcomes before state authorities decreed these a failure and issued the ultimatum. Prime Minister Hazem el-Blawi warned just ahead of the Muslim Eid al-Fitr holiday that the government's decision to clear the sit-ins was irreversible. According to the Interior Ministry, the plan was originally to disperse the 6-week-old sit-ins gradually by forming cordons around the two sites as early as dawn Monday 12 August, allowing protesters to leave but preventing others from getting in, to minimize casualties before using water cannons and tear gas. However, leaked news of the plan prompted thousands of protesters to defiantly flood into two protest camps, prompting police to postpone the move. The protesters have been fortifying the sit-in camps. In Rabaa, men with helmets, sticks and what appeared to be protective sports equipment guarded barricades made of sandbags, truck tires and bricks. They have also built 3 concrete waist-high barriers against armored vehicles. Raids On 14 August 2013, shortly after 700, Egyptian police moved to disperse the camps. According to the Interior Ministry, the plan was originally to stop the protests gradually by cutting off supply lines while providing a safe exit for those who elected to leave. By 800, the smaller camp, near Cairo University in Giza, was cleared of protesters. But it took about 12 hours for police to take control of the main sit-in site near the Rabaa al-Adawiyya mosque that has served as the epicenter of the pro-Morsi campaign. The police in riot gear used tear gas, rubber bullets, birdshot and live ammunition to disperse the protesters while being supported by bulldozers to clear barricades and covered by armored vehicles and snipers on rooftops. Military helicopters swooped low over the encampment and loudspeaker warning told the thousands of demonstrators to leave the area to take designated routes to safety. For much of the afternoon, thousands of Morsi supporters chanting Allahu Akbar tried to join those besieged by the security forces inside the Nasser city camp. They were driven away when police fired tear gas. All entrances to Rabaa were later blocked by security forces. Brotherhood spokesman Gehad El-Haddad accused police snipers of firing at Rabaa protesters from the rooftop of surrounding buildings, and protesters also claimed that snipers fired down on those trying to flee or reach safety. In the afternoon, the protesters managed to push the police back to the point where they could get into a makeshift hospital. Shortly before dusk, soldiers and police officers renewed their push and the protesters were forced to flee. The government forces seized control, destroying what remained of the protest camp. Immediately after the morning raids, the National Coalition for Supporting Legitimacy, a pro-Morsi group, reiterated its rejection of violence and called on its members to continue to protest to stop the massacre. The attacks set off retaliatory clashes and protest marches. Protesters blocked important roads, including the Ring Road, a key route that connects many of Cairo's major districts. Crowds of Morsi supporters marched toward eastern Cairo in the late morning, running into a barrage of gunfire as they confronted police lines. In addition, there have been a number of attacks on police stations around the country. Interior Minister Mohammed Ibrahim put the number of stations attacked at 21. Angry mobs reportedly also attacked dozens of Christian properties. By nightfall, the military-backed interim government had declared a state of emergency, declaring a curfew. However, protesters had established new sit-ins outside Mustafa Mahmoud Mosque in Mohandassine, Giza and others in cities around the country, defying the new curfew and the Interior Minister's vows to break up any such assemblies. Initial reports by the Egyptian Health Ministry said 235 protesters, 3 journalists and 43 policemen died in the violence and more than 2,000 injured, with the death toll expected to rise. Many protesters were shot and at least one was burned alive. Egyptian state television aired images purporting to show weapons confiscated from the sit-in protesters' camps, including automatic rifles and thousands of rounds of ammunition. Various journalists and news agencies discredited these claims as multiple independent journalists had visited and inspected the camps for weapons prior to the attacks, finding none of the purported weapons caches. A television channel supporting the government aired unverified infrared footage purporting to show Muslim Brotherhood members firing automatic weapons against security forces. According to several political analysts and historians, the force with which the military attacked the protesters appeared designed to provoke a violent response from supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood. Aftermath. The violence then spread across the country as people learned what had happened in Cairo and took to the streets in anger. In the Giza Governorate, an angry mob attacked a police station, one of 21 such attacks according to the Interior Ministry. In southern Egypt, between 2 and 7 Coptic Christian churches were burned to the ground, according to the New York Times. while the Interior Ministry said that at least 7 Coptic Christian churches had been vandalized or torched by suspected Islamists. One Coptic rights group, Massacre Youth Union, estimated that as many as 36 churches were completely devastated by fire across 9 Egyptian governorates, including in Minya, Sohag and Asyut, and many other churches were looted or stormed in ensuing street violence. Christian activists accused Morsi supporters of waging a war of retaliation against Copts in Egypt. According to the government, Muslim Brotherhood's supporters attacked government headquarters in several governorates. Supporters of Morsi staged solidarity protests against the crackdown, with clashes reported in Ismailia, Alexandria, Suez, Upper Egypt, Sassi, Utam, Aswan and other places. In defiance of the curfew, Morsi supporters vowed to return to the streets to continue protesting against the crackdown and coup. Egyptian banks and its stock market were closed through the 15th of August. Rail travel into and out of Cairo was also suspended. In Giza, hundreds of Morsi supporters also set fire to local government offices. The government then authorized the use of live ammunition on anyone attacking state buildings. Tamarod called on its supporters to protest on the 16th of August and to form neighborhood watch groups to guard against Morsi supporters. In like measure, Morsi supporters vowed to keep up their campaign to get the deposed president reinstated. The next day, hundreds of Morsi supporters barricaded themselves at the Fatah Mosque in Cairo. After a day, security forces again cleared the demonstrators. The Muslim Brotherhood then reiterated its call to hold continued protests. The Muslim Brotherhood called for a «day of rage» after Friday prayers on the 16th of August, with Muslim Brotherhood spokesman Gehad El-Haddad writing on Twitter, "Anti-coup rallies tomorrow will depart from all mosques of Cairo and head towards Ramses Square after Jumu'ah prayer in Friday of Anger." The party also released a statement that read, "Despite the pain and sorrow over the loss of our martyrs, the latest coup-maker's crime has increased our determination to end them." By the 20th of August, the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, Muhammad Badia, who had been in hiding, was arrested after being found residential flat in Nasser City. Pro-Morsi supporters continued to rally, and on the 30th of August 6 protesters were killed. State of emergency and curfew. The interim government declared a month-long state of emergency beginning at 1600. By doing so, the right to a trial and due process of the law was suspended. A 1900 curfew was also declared in 14 of the 27 governorates. The army promised to enforce the curfew with the utmost firmness. The curfew would be enforced from 1900 to 600 for a month, along with the state of emergency. The following day, Egypt's interim cabinet lifted the curfew in the cities of Sharm el-Sheikh, Taba and Dahab in South Sinai to avoid harming tourism. The curfew had started to hurt the Cairo economy after less than a week in place. Starting on the 24th of August, the interim cabinet decided to shorten the curfew by 2 hours to 2100 to 600 excluding Fridays. On the 31st of August, the curfew was again shortened by another 2 hours to 2300 to 600 excluding Fridays, where the curfew remained from 1900 to 600. On the 12th of September, Egypt's interim government decided to extend the state of emergency for 2 months, until the 14th of November, along with the curfew, which remained unchanged. Starting the 21st of September, the curfew was again shortened by 2 hours to 000 to 500 excluding Fridays, where the curfew was shortened by 1 hour to 1900 to 500. On the 24th of October, the curfew was again shortened by 1 hour to 100 to 500 excluding Fridays, where the curfew remained from 1900 to 500. Casualties. On the 14th of August, the Egyptian Health Ministry said that at least 600 protesters were killed and more than 2,000 injured. An additional 43 police officers were killed in the violence, according to the Interior Ministry. According to the New York Times, those figures were likely to rise as more information became available. The Muslim Brotherhood estimated the death toll at 2,000. Of the dead, 37 were from the town of Fayoum. Many of the dead appeared to be teenagers. On the 15th of August, the Egyptian Health Ministry then raised the death toll to 638 and number of injured to 3,994 from the bloody clashes that broke out the previous day. Of those killed, 595 were protesters, including 377 at Rabaa al-Adawiyya and 90 in al-Nadar Square. It is unclear whether at least a dozen of charred corpses and others that remain unidentified have been included in the official death toll. However, the Muslim Brotherhood and NCSL put the number of deaths from the Rabaa sit-in alone at about 2,600 people. On the 12th of August 2014, Human Rights Watch said in a report based on a year-long investigation that in the 14th of August dispersal of the Rabaa al-Adawiyya sit-in alone, security forces, following a plan that envisioned several thousand deaths, killed a minimum of 817 people, and more likely at least 1,000. Kenneth Roth, the executive director of Human Rights Watch, said that, in Rabaa Square, Egyptian security forces carried out one of the world's largest killings of demonstrators in a single day in recent history, and that this wasn't merely a case of excessive force or poor training. It was a violent crackdown planned at the highest levels of the Egyptian government. Many deaths were also reported in Giza. Workers of Al-Iman Mosque claim the ministry won't acknowledge, in their official death toll tally, over 200 charred bodies that had been moved to the mosque from a protest camp nearby. At Al-Iman Mosque in Nasser City the next day, hundreds of bodies were still on the floor of a makeshift morgue wrapped in shrouds and kept cool with blocks of ice. Some bodies also bore gunshot wounds and many were charred beyond recognition. Among the dead was the daughter of Mohammed el-Beltaji, a prominent lawmaker. Attack on journalists during the dispersal. Journalists covering the event were trapped. 4 of them were killed, while others were injured or detained. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, it was the deadliest day for journalists in Egypt since the organization began keeping records in 1992. Veteran Sky News camera operator Michael "Mick" Dean, 61, was killed. Dean was an experienced journalist who had previously worked for CNN before working for Sky News for 15 years. Photos of Dean's body showed that he was wearing a helmet that clearly identified him as a journalist. The CPJ said Dean was the 1,000th journalist it had confirmed killed worldwide. Egyptian journalist Habiba Ahmed Abdelaziz, 26, worked for Gulf news publication Express newspaper, was shot and killed. Egyptian reporter Ahmed Abdelgawad, who was with the Al Akbar state-run newspaper and was an editorial manager for the Muslim Brotherhood television satellite channel MISR 25, was shot in the back and killed. RASSD News Network photojournalist Mossab El-Shami was also killed. Among the journalists most seriously injured were Al-Watan editor Tariq Abbas, who was shot in the face, and Al-Masri Al-Yum photojournalist Alar Al-Kawawi, who was shot in the foot. Among the detained journalists were Al Jazeera journalist Abdullah Al-Shami and Al Jazeera Media Network's Mubashir MISR photographer Zmad Eddin Al-Sayed and Abdul Rahman Al-Moahibella, and Freedom and Justice Party MISR 25 journalist Radwa Al-Salora. Previously, during the 2013 political violence in Egypt, photojournalist Ahmed Assem El-Senasi was killed on 8 July 2013 as a result of sniper fire, while covering a protest. In total, 5 journalists were killed since political violence erupted after the military coup in 2013. Egypt's State Information Service released a statement on 17 August critical of news coverage from foreign journalists. Media coverage has steered away from objectivity and neutrality, which has led to a distorted image that is very far from the facts. Egypt is feeling severe bitterness towards some Western media coverage that is biased to the Muslim Brotherhood and ignores shedding light on violent and terror acts that are perpetrated by this group. The United Nations said about the sit-in dispersal that there had been serious violations of human rights law, including the killing of journalists, after UNESCO's Director General Irina Bokova had already condemned the killing earlier of journalist El Senussi in July. The International Press Institute demanded that Egypt be held responsible for violations of journalists' rights and the Egyptian military's targeting of the press corps. ENCHR investigation. Egypt's National Council for Human Rights' investigation blamed both the police and protesters for the incident. The investigation mainly blamed the police for using excessive force, and protesters for being armed. They blamed security forces for using excessive gunfire and failing to protect peaceful protesters during the crackdown on the sit-in, killing hundreds. According to the report, gunmen inside the sit-in shot fire at police officers, escalating the violence.